everybody, I am Cassidy, I am the Hippie Catholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to be part of the conversation. So I'm coming at you with some response videos. So a content creator I enjoy named Jimmy Snow started to comment on a Catholic creator. This Catholic YouTuber is named Brian Holdsworth. Jimmy Snow's channel was formerly called Mr. Atheist, so you know, it's an atheist commenting on a Catholic creator, and I'm just like, ooh, this is gonna be interesting. So I've been wanting to comment on Brian Holdsworth for a really long time because I really enjoy his art and his production value, but at the same time, I find a lot of his views to be really harmful. And I don't know if this is always intentional, but it's just something that I feel like that's worth noting. I respect him as another Catholic creator on this platform. He's been obviously putting in a ton of work into his content. I guess I just want to give him credit where it's due, if that makes sense. But at the same time, some of his content has been really hurtful. I don't mean this to like throw anybody under the bus or anything like that. It's just that I just feel like that as another Catholic, I feel like that I have some credibility to comment on some of the things that Brian Holdsworth has said and to kind of charitably push back on some of those things. It was actually in a video defending Pope Francis, which I love Pope Francis. Pope Francis is my absolute favorite pope. So like, I don't want the takeaway to be like, oh, Cassidy doesn't like the Pope or whatever. While I was watching that video, this one thing kind of really stood out to me as pretty problematic. Brian basically said about when you attack the perceived head of the household, you're attacking the entire family. And again, I don't know if by this statement he was actually like intentional or not. I don't know, but I still feel like that he should be aware of this. I'll play the clip for you guys.
I remember seeing a headline recently about how one of Donald Trump's nieces was involved in a tell-all scandal-ridden book that was designed to injure his character. And if that family has a patriarchal figure, a father figure for the whole family, it's probably President Donald Trump. And whether you love him or hate him, just from an outsider's perspective, it's fairly obvious that he's had some failings as a father figure in that family. The fact that he's been married 3 times is a perfect example. But when I saw his niece was doing this, I couldn't help but being repulsed by it a little bit. It seemed to me like it was a serious betrayal, not just against Donald Trump, but against the entire family. And the obvious reason is because it's being used by his and the family's enemies against their interests. When you attack the head of a family, you attack the whole family. There's really no separation of those two actions.
It just was a very triggering clip for me because I actually come from a family that had some narcissistic abuse. Usually in narcissistic families, there's usually the abuser, the enablers, and the scapegoat. And usually the perceived head of the family is the abuser and the rest of the family are the enablers. Scapegoats often become the black sheep of the family and oftentimes end up having to leave or just getting disowned in some way. And I know that because I'm one of those black sheep. Basically, myself, my mom, and the rest of my nuclear family got disowned from my mom's side of the family. That's a really big family. Basically, we don't talk to her side of the family anymore because that family was extremely narcissistically abusive, and my narcissistic family was absolutely obsessed with the whole head of the family thing, that it was like you could not criticize the perceived head of the family even if they were wrong. And that's also like a red flag with a cult, is that like you could not like criticize the leader at all. If you were to criticize that said member of the family, the head of the family, so to speak, you were deemed as less of a valid family member, if that makes sense. And I'm not really trying to tie this to the Pope. That's kind of a different thing altogether. And I respect the office of the Pope in general. Even the Pope can be criticized, I think should be criticized. I think that he should be respected as the Pope, but like I think that the Pope needs to be open to criticism just like anybody else. And I think that Pope Francis is really open to criticism, and he's a fantastic pope. I can't hype him up enough. Brian Holdsworth uses the example of the Trump family and how Mary Trump, who is a psychologist, by the way, wrote an expose about Donald Trump, and that by her doing that, that was somehow her betraying her family. And that just did not sit with me right, because it's like, does that make Mary Trump less of a Trump because she's saying that this person who is the head of the family and was the head of the United States is an abusive, toxic person? No. I think that that's a very brave thing. I think that that's a very healthy thing. That's something we should be encouraging people to do. It's so hard for survivors to come out about their stories of narcissistic abuse. That attitude of like, I don't respect anybody who comes out against their toxic family, that's bogus. I don't like that at all. That was really triggering to me, to the point that I stopped watching Brian's content, because I'm responsible for my own mental health. He's not gonna worry about if my mental health is okay. Like, I have to be in charge of if I'm going to be okay. So I stopped watching his content. I really stopped watching his content until Jimmy decided to comment on Brian's content. I made a lo-fi storytime video on my comedy channel a while back about the time that this narcissistic head of the family took me to court over sharing memes that she perceived to be about her. You can't make this stuff up. I was a minor too, like, just this, it was shenanigans. I was literally like 16, 17 years old. If you want to check that out, that'll be in the description box below for you guys. And again, I don't know if Brian realizes how hurtful some of the things he says in his videos are. You know, I think that it still should be addressed. Like, you know, I've accidentally hurt people's feelings, and they've talked to me about it, and because I care about their feelings, I rectify the situation, right? And I hear them out, and I think that's what I'm trying to do here too. I'm trying to be, you know, as charitable as possible. I'm also saying this because I have written Brian Holdsworth many an angry paragraph, like, under his videos. I wrote a long one under this now deleted video that was about how the Spanish Inquisition didn't bother him.
The Spanish Inquisition.
And I was like, I was furious. It was a good idea for him to take that video down. I think that this guy sums up my reaction the best.
As a Catholic, I'm supposed to forgive everything. Every time. So before I begin, let me just say that I forgive Brian Holdsworth. Even though I forgive Brian Holdsworth, I still know for a fact that he's wrong. I gave him a reply from this video where he's defending the Inquisition. And I replied with this: wow, you are a shill and an idiot. If you were not speaking from a script, I would call you ideologically possessed. I, as someone who is glad to be Catholic and openly defends his faith on YouTube and actually debates against atheists and anti-theists, from a much smaller channel, I call you a coward for making this video. I can show you Jewish names list that include my own family, that show who were forcefully converted during the Reconquista and the Inquisition in Spain as part of the Sephardic diaspora. What's next? Are you going to defend how the Spanish conquistadors treated the Native Americans and the Mesoamericans?
If you want to know what Brian Holdsworth's response to this dude's comment was, watch the rest of this dude's video all about Brian Holdsworth and his response to the Spanish Inquisition video, and I'll put that in the description box below. And before I wanted to make this response video, I actually asked you guys for your hot takes on Jimmy's video, because that's the video I'm going to be reacting to, and you guys gave me some really awesome feedback, so thank you so much for that. Some of you have also informed me that you have actually met Brian Holdsworth and have even gone to mass with him before, and I've taken that into account. I've never met him personally, so I can't speak on him personally, but I know that many of you guys have gone up to bat for his character, so I will take that into account, of course. But at the same time, I think that some of the things that Brian has said are very harmful, and he has a public platform, and when you have a public platform, you're affecting the way a lot of people believe and think, and there's a certain level of responsibility that goes with that. So when I see something harmful, I'm gonna have to push back on it a little bit. But this is all done in love, all done in charity. no bad blood between me and Brian Holdsworth, okay? I can understand that Brian might come off as having like an intellectual superiority complex, but this title that Jimmy Snow has of like accusing him of being a cult leader is a bit overboard. Looking at Jimmy's thumbnail and then looking at Brian Holdsworth's video that he's responding to, the title of Brian's video is Bisexual Propaganda If I Ever Did See. That's not how straightness works. You don't choose to be straight. If you're choosing to be straight, you're probably not that straight. And like, we stand that here at the HippieCatholic, but I'm just saying, like, bisexual propaganda, okay? So yeah, I'm excited to be getting into reacting to Jimmy Snow's video. I will also say that there's aspects of Brian Holdsworth's content that I do actually enjoy. I love that he is a great proponent of the arts, from death metal to Gregorian chants. I think that's cool. And again, his production value is really, really awesome. And I really, really enjoyed his views on Harry Potter, because like, I'm a Harry Potter fan, I'm a Slytherin. Yeah, I'm one of those girls. I think it's cool that he's telling parents to expose their kids to Harry Potter and weigh for themselves if the series is producing good fruits out of their children or bad fruits out of their children, you know, especially considering how many conservative Christians burn Harry Potter books.
And if pagan literature was good enough for St. Augustine and St. Justin Martyr and St. Basil, then we shouldn't treat it like some kind of cursed object that to even get close to it would risk demonic possession. And in the case of the Harry Potter books, there is a lot of exposition of virtue. Lessons in prudence and justice and fortitude and temperance are on full display, just as they are in ancient Greek poems and epics. So if we want to treat everything with a pagan influence as merely demonic and irredeemable, then we can't have our Middle Earth and eat it too. I think that a person can and even should read the Harry Potter books for the good that they offer. I do still think that there can be instances in which a person should refuse to do so or restrict those in their care from doing so. Like, if I thought that my kids were having a tough time discerning the good lessons that could be gleaned from those books, or if I thought that the potentially bad influences that could exist there were taking root in their character, then yeah, I might ban those books from my house.
I thought that Brian Holdsworth's response was really, really well measured. So calling somebody a cult leader is a really, really big claim, and that needs to be backed by extraordinary evidence. Just because you have a large platform and bad views doesn't in itself make you a cult leader. Cults are very, very real. We need to increase awareness about them. And there is a lot of emotional, physical, spiritual, and psychological abuse that goes into cults. Like, cults ruin lives. I mean, that is why we have things like the bite model, and the bite model is a great tool to help people assess if a group that they're involved with is a cult. But even good tools are not always perfect, and even the bite model isn't completely perfect. Cults are one of my favorite, like, academic things to study, and I feel like that I would have, like, a really interesting perspective on cults as a religious person. I really respect Jimmy and his collaborators for raising awareness about cults. We have to be mindful not to overuse words, because then they don't have the proper impact that we need them to have. And especially if the cult has like really, really big online platforms, you want to make sure that your arguments are watertight, because either way, the cultists and their enablers are going to fall down on your head. I really love Jimmy, and this only comes from a place of respect for him and for the good work that his platform has done. I'm just really trying to find the shades of gray in this situation, because I'm politically progressive and I'm Catholic. If Brian Holdsworth is a cult leader, then you can probably argue that Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson are also cult leaders, because they have large platforms with very, very rabidly adoring fans and have done some really shady things and have some really shady views. I mean, I guess you could, but that's not what I'm trying to get at here. We don't look at Jeffree Star and think cult leader, right? I mean, if you think he's a cult leader, I mean, go ahead, make a response video, disprove me, I'm fine with that. But do I think that Brian Holdsworth is a cult leader? No. Does he have some ecclesial nonsense? Yes. Have I seen some red flags in his content? Absolutely. But again, I just really, really want to extend charity, and I really, really want to help personal growth for both parties that are involved with this. Let's get into Jimmy's video.
Yeah, I'm really worried about his thoughts on queer issues, but for some reason people listen to him. And as far as Catholics go, he's much worse than the president or the Pope. So let's get started.
I'm going to say one thing going in. It seems like that Jimmy, an atheist, has more respect for Pope Francis than a lot of trads I've seen on Reddit.
Seriously. Am I the only one who thinks he has either a god or prophet complex?
I like the Catholic music in Brian's intro. Like, I don't know, I like music. Music's cool.
We could ask, what is more noble or good? The flourishing or fulfillment of an individual, a single person, or the flourishing and fulfillment of a community of individuals?
Holy crap. He's basically trying to use a comparable way of talking, like we might talk about humanism, the concept of humanism being to lead to the flourishing of humans in general. However, it doesn't totally disregard the individual. In fact, because there are so many uncertain things, you often do make concessions for an individual. For example, that's why humanism is generally anti-death penalty, despite the fact that a permanent removal of a person from society may overall benefit the society. Instead, we do things to give you, in effect, that same level of separation with, granted, less convenience, but to remove the guilt that can come from uncertainty. So he's trying to sound like, oh, well, this is basically the humanist approach, which Catholicism never was. If Catholicism and humanism were the same, since Catholicism as a concept has existed much longer than humanism, at least with a title to itself, we would have never come up with the term humanism.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's a bit ironic. I'm gonna say it. Jimmy has some Franciscan energy that he doesn't realize, and I love it. And fun fact, this is not by accident. The Franciscans are actually tied to the humanist movement. In the 13th century, we saw rejuvenation within the church by the Order of St. Francis, aka the Franciscans. The Franciscans contributed to the new humanism that is identified with the Renaissance, and that was a precursor to the secular humanism that we have today. There's a lot of different kinds of humanism that were predecessors of the secular humanism we have today. Secular humanism is quite a bit different than the one that the Franciscans upheld and propagated in the 13th century, but the Catholic Church did contribute to the ideology of humanism. And that is something I've always noticed, that a lot of Catholics and atheists can really, really get along, especially Catholics who really, really follow like the Franciscan order and their ethics and their kind of code of conduct. I've noticed that Franciscan embracing Catholics and humanist atheists can really, really have really good alliances and really, really great conversations, and that isn't by accident, because the Franciscans have a connection to humanism. You can read more about that in my sources below.
I'm sure at some point he has some stupid point about queer identities preventing flourishing because of the reduced reproduction. This in a world with lots of children who are starving, or in the adoption system that haven't been adopted, foster system, all that kind of stuff.
I don't like the overpopulation argument because it gets into some really weird genocide-y places. Those like overpopulation arguments just have the same energy as those memes that were circulating in the beginning of the pandemic, being like, yay, all the people are dying, the world is healing. Because let's be real here, it wouldn't be the rich that would be like having their populations get controlled, it would be the poor. That's just a big can of worms we do not want to open. However, queer presence does lead to the flourishing of a society. As you all know, I'm LGBTQ affirming. I believe that queer relationships bear their own fruit that is unique and different from what fruits straight relationships create, and I think that's beautiful. But the whole we need less people to save the environment argument is really, really gross. I would argue that just cutting back on meat, and even possibly cutting out meat altogether from your diet, would do more for the environment than population control. So yeah, just saying. Jimmy highlights how Brian makes the offensive comparison between food preference and sexuality.
I bet, hang on, let me let him expound, because I bet he's going to make the point I think he's going to make.
If you get turned on by certain things,
Yep.
That's your identity. And the people who similarly get turned on by those things, that's your community.
You are trying to take sexuality, and you know what? He hasn't mentioned sexual orientation in this at all. So he is probably trying to both conflate promiscuity with, like, how much you have sex with sexual orientation and sort of condemn both under the same umbrella. It's not actually better. And in this case, with the happens to get turned on by, that's where he's clearly going straight for orientation, not to mention the other things that he's used as defenses of sexuality so far. It's very clearly that he's just trying to keep the quiet part as quiet as he can. He is trying to take sexuality and create it as though it is extremely arbitrary. Are there things about sexuality that we have to exhibit self-control over? Of course there are. In fact, it is the queer community that was first having conversations about consent long before it was ever even mentioned in a sex ed class, because in many places in this country, it still isn't.
Sexuality is core to the embodiment of the human person. It is far more intrinsic than what food you decide to eat. And it is quite frankly insulting to compare something as powerful and momentous as sexuality to what food you decide to eat. And I also just want to make this disclaimer here. I know that my stances on LGBTQ issues and birth control do dissent from church teaching. That doesn't mean that I'm not Catholic, and that doesn't mean that that stance is anti-Catholic. I know that a lot of people like to throw that term around. I feel like that the people who scream anti-Catholic at Catholics are really, really destructive to the church, because it's just infighting, and it just leaves us open for everyone else to chew us up and spit us out. But yeah, I'm LGBTQ affirming. This is an LGBTQ affirming platform. I am a Catholic by virtue of my baptism. And guess what? Church teaching actually tells us to dissent from church teaching if it goes against our conscience. That's a whole separate issue that we can talk about, but Breaking in the Habit makes some great content about that. So I'll put that in the description box below for you guys. And of course, Jimmy brings out the thing about the Catholic sex scandals, which, I mean, rightfully so.
And it's really funny when he's talking about these appetites, and yet he's in a church where people in the clergy are denied any level of sexuality, which has clearly shown just festers really abhorrent sexualities and curiosities and turns into abuse. But he wants to make the argument about, well, if abstinence with unhealthy food works, of course it would with sex too. Yeah, that's worked out really, really well for your organization, for your church.
I'm really, really excited to release some content that I'm making currently about the scandals in the Catholic Church. So if you would like to see that content, please subscribe. I've been trying to spend a lot of time on that content because I want it to be as high quality as possible.
Like, oh yeah, but wait. I got some metaphors about animals, beards, and all these things that I have ready to go to really justify this after it failed to do so. Because, Brian, you think you're a goddamn prophet and that you speak for God. Thank goodness you were here to help out God speak for himself.
Jimmy makes a lot of ad hominems that I kind of think are unnecessary. I understand that he's really, really impassioned about this issue because Jimmy is pansexual, and like, again, I understand his feelings, but you know, I've learned too as a content creator that we have to be really, really careful about what we say online and about like what we say in private, because our words, when we have platforms, can be really, really hurtful to people. His arguments were good enough, like, on their own. He didn't need to add, like, the stuff making fun of Brian's beard and stuff. Like, that's kind of nonsense. So yeah, that's kind of my response to the video. And again, I don't think that Brian Holdsworth is a cult leader, because we can't judge if somebody's a cult leader based on what their political opinions are alone. You can be a cult leader and have some pretty woke views, which is terrifying, but it's true. Example, Jim Jones. Jim Jones was a massive proponent of racial equality, and he was a proud socialist during the Red Scare.
What have we done in a short time? We have 4 senior citizen homes that are the most innovating, the most beautiful you want to see. Now, my home is stone blocked, and there's not a piece of new furniture in it, but our senior citizen homes, They're elegant.
But yet the man was a monster. His views were a front for him to assume absolute control over his cult, and that control left over 900 people dead in the jungle. Cults are not always religious. They're very, very shifty. They, and cults really, really challenge our perceptions of good and evil. I mean, they're very, very complex. They can be political, they can be religious, they can take really any form, really. Cults will take whatever form they need to recruit you, because nobody joins a cult, they're recruited into a cult. Before any of you guys say that Catholicism is a cult, it isn't. The church as a whole, I do not think is a cult. Catholics are really a mixed bag of people, and I think that really, really speaks to the universal nature of our church. I think that the fact that the Catholic Church actually encourages people to dissent if the church teaching is against their conscience, I think that that's super, super healthy. And I think that's an antidote to cults, really. And I mean, even St. Thomas Aquinas was a dissenter in his day. St. Padre Pio as well. You have to weigh moral issues from a well-formed conscience. What brought me back to Catholicism after I was agnostic for a while was its openness to intellectual debate. Brian, as a Catholic, would have the right to speak on his interpretation of church teaching and his interpretation of the Bible, as well as interpreting the magisterial teaching of certain things in the Bible and such. We do really, really weigh the teachings for ourselves. Again, I will leave some Breaking in the Habit videos for you guys to watch. Like, he makes fantastic content, really breaking this stuff down. Getting back to cults, I think that the truth of the matter is no one is immune to being drawn into a cult. If you have trauma, which we all do to some degree, you are susceptible to cults. Doesn't matter how educated you are, doesn't matter what gender you are, what sexuality you are. If you have trauma, you can get lured into a cult. And I don't say that to scare you, but I say that to humble you. Especially when you're in transition periods of your life, that's when a lot of cult people will try to approach you. Transition periods are really, really easy times for people to change their political and religious views. That's why people who are like 18 in college, or people that are like having like their midlife crisis, are like really, really targeted by cults. You can't judge if somebody's a cult leader based on their beliefs alone. The beliefs can be clues, they can be red flags even, but they can't be the only things. Because again, there's that abuse element that goes with cults. And that's why it's really, really hard for religious scholars and mental health professionals alike to decide if an organization is a cult or not. And I think that there also is truth in giving institutions the power to clean out their own closets. Jimmy Snow is an atheist creator, and he comes from a Mormon background. He has no background in Catholicism. Catholicism is very, very different from Mormonism. I just feel like that I needed to step in and have a say in this conversation because I am politically left-leaning, and I'm also a Catholic. And I have to say that this kind of clickbaity stuff is why the right makes fun of us. When we resort to ad hominems, we put ourselves in a bad academic position. There's a reason why ad hominems are considered fallacies. Again, I'm LGBTQ affirming, I'm left-leaning, and I'm Catholic. Roman Catholic, to be particular, because there's different, there's the Byzantine Catholics and all that good stuff. Catholics really are very diverse. And I just feel like that Jimmy's video kind of stoked up even more misconceptions surrounding my church. Catholicism really, really is the universal church. We're a very, very diverse group of people with some core things uniting us. We should really try to engage in criticism of other creators with a level of respect. We are dealing with human feelings. That doesn't mean minimizing what these people have done or holding back on holding them accountable. It means approaching them with love. It does mean not using witch hunter phrasing to get views and income at the expense of another creator's reputation. At the end of the day, we have the right to disagree, criticize even, and hold people accountable when they're hurting people, especially when they're hurting marginalized people. But we all need to remember that we are beings that function mostly on emotion, even post-Enlightenment thinkers. I definitely think that there are red flag behaviors and red flag statements that Brian Holdsworth has used in his videos, and I think that that needs to be spoken about more, but calling him a cult leader is a bit hyperbolic. I am open to changing my opinions based on evidence that is presented. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Please consider supporting me on my Patreon account. That really supports the channel and supports the work that I'm doing here. Thank you so much to my lovely patrons. Your generosity is inspiring and allows me to do what I'm doing. If you're not in the position to donate monthly, you can still help the channel by leaving a one-time donation on my Venmo account. And if you're not in the financial position to donate at all, that's totally okay. You can still support the channel by liking, sharing, and commenting and subscribing to my channel. That really helps a lot, and I would love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. I am Cassidy. I am the Hippie Catholic. God bless.